And today we're going to be joined by Rachel Rhodes, who's going to be our speaker presenter.
My name is Rachel Rhodes. I'm the horticulture educator, master gardener coordinator for Queen Anne's County. So I'm up in the midshore.
We try to present topics that are relevant really for all of Maryland and beyond Maryland. So hopefully this can be of use to you in your gardening endeavors, especially if you're working with like a minimal amount of space, like a balcony or in a more urban area. So
All right, everyone. Today we're going to talk about maximizing our gardening space with container food gardening. And I especially love container gardening because it opens the door for everyone to grow plants, no matter their space or their circumstances. I think we all enjoy gardening because it adds beauty and value to our landscape, and it can draw attention to focal points or help screen out less desirable areas. Edible plants have their own added benefit from being fresh and having nutritious food right at our fingertips. However, many of us experiences challenges like poor soil or inadequate drainage, hard surfaces, or even physical limitations that can make traditional in-ground gardening more difficult. Container gardening provides a flexible and accessible solution to overcome many of these obstacles, making it more possible for everyone to experience the joy and the rewards of growing plants. So I'd like to bring your attention to this poster. It's a direct message from our federal funder who wants to be sure that you know you have that accommodation if necessary. The Orange and Justice for All Civil Rights poster is the primary method utilized to inform customers of their rights, responsibilities, and displays information relevant specifically to our Title IX of the Education Amendments. If you have any questions or concerns, we hope you'll let us know. And the poster also lets you know how you can contact the federal government as well. So before we get started, I usually like to go over our organizational chart for the Master Gardener Program since I am a representative of the Master Gardener Program. We are in the College of Agricultural and Natural Resources and under the umbrella of the University of Maryland Extension within the University of Maryland system. We have 6 Master Gardener sub-programs that we educate our public on. So we have plant clinics, Grow and Eat It, and this program falls under our Grow and Eat It program. And then our Master Gardener Baywise program, where we talk about living with the bay and gardening for the bay. We have a pollinator program, even composting and native plants. So why grow in containers? I think there are many benefits to containers, from flexibility and accessibility that our traditional gardens often can't meet. And it's the ideal solution for gardeners of all experience levels and living situations. They offer more control over our growing conditions. We can have fewer pests, disease. Some of them are even weed-free, believe it or not. And they're easier to cover and protect our plants from insects and pests. The first thing when you think about container gardening is, where are you going to put it? Where is it the most easily accessible for you? Where are you getting the most sunlight? So most of our vegetable gardening plants need between 4 to 6, even 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, depending on the plant. Southern exposure is where you're going to get the longest period of strong sunlight. And then Western is where we can experience our afternoon. Eastern is morning. And Northern, we have the least and the weakest amount of sunlight. So if you kind of want to figure out where you can get the most amount of sunlight, you can use a satellite image and the sun and shade calculation for website and gardeners. This application can simulate cast-it shadows and even calculate the sun and shade length on a particular property. So this is a very relevant way to depict what kind of sunlight you have in your property. The best part about container gardening is that you can use any level of surface. You can use a deck, a patio, a balcony, along a driveway or sidewalk, or even along the side of your house if you don't want to dig in the ground. Pots can be moved for more or less exposure. And you can even put them in a place where you have easy access to water. Some major concerns that we'd like to talk about with sunlight and the area where you put your containers. Hard surfaces like our brick and our stone, even sidewalks and decking can release solar radiation, and that can cause heat stress like you see on this pole bean plant right there. You also might stain concrete or wood decking if you're putting your containers on wood. And the weight of the container is very also as well because soil can be very heavy. We have to think about the weight limit that our decks can hold. 20-inch diameter container filled with moist potting soil can weigh about 100 pounds. So you really have to think about that as well. And I know here on the Eastern Shore, we talk about a lot of wind damage. If we have a storm, they can easily blow our pots. So making sure that they're in a protected area from wind. Now, my favorite thing, containers. I love containers because I have an unlimited choice of things that I can buy. Some that are like cute and are glazed, or you can use so many different forms of containers to make your garden possible. So here's just a few that you can actually grow food in. And not only just our pretty landscape plants. So terracotta pots are a great choice because they are easily accessible and they're weighty enough that they're not going to blow over typically in the wind. You can also use recycled containers. Just make sure that you wash them before planting and avoid those that have previously held detergents or chemicals. I would also avoid metal or aluminum as well because they heat up really fast and can make that soil really dry very fast. Fabric pots are great. They're becoming more and more available store-wide, and I like those. I like these a lot because they actually encourage air pruning. So when the roots hit the air, they will kind of like prune themselves, and you'll get a much more dense fibrous root as opposed to hitting a wall and becoming root bound. We also have plastic nursery pots that can be used, or even 5-gallon buckets. And then we have self-watering containers as well that you can purchase, and I'll go over those a little bit later. Dark colors for containers will also result in higher soil temperatures, and that could injure our younger, tender roots, and that might actually prevent the plant from fully developing a good root system. And containers made from porous materials like clay, ceramic, even concrete and wood will dry out more quickly than containers made from plastic or metal because they're highly porous. Even those unglazed clay walls will wick moisture out of the soil and evaporate really easily. If you are reusing containers from year to year, you're going to remove the debris, rinse, and soak for 10 minutes in a 10% bleach solution. So that's 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, and then rinse and air drop. And you can also be resourceful in the things that you grow in, like leftover yogurt containers. If you drill a hole in the bottom or put a hole in the bottom, that's a great container to start some lettuce in, or maybe some pea microgreens, even plastic bottles, or you could even use a leftover coffee sack if you don't have a fabric grow pot. So I've mentioned fabric bags a lot. They're a relatively new product that we have seen on the market. There are many sizes available. And I really like these because they are easy to move and they are light. You have many different sizes. They're relatively inexpensive. And like I said before, they encourage that air pruning method. And this natural process is when the tip of the root is exposed to air, it causes it to dry out and stop growing. And that means that root is pruned. And then the new root forms, producing a denser, fibrous root system, as opposed to hitting a solid wall and moving around and around that pot. You do need to be aware that if you're using these from year to year, you have to scout for plant diseases and soil-borne diseases, such as Pythium, which is a root rot disease because of that dense, wet potting soil. And if you are reusing these from year to year, just like any container, you're going to want to clean it. to kill any lingering fungi or bacteria from previous plant years. So you can soak the bag roughly for about 30 minutes in that 1 part bleach, 9 part water solution, and then rinse it thoroughly and let them dry in the sun. These are great bags for potatoes or even tomatoes. I really like using them for potatoes because you can use them all season and then dump it out and you don't have to dig through the soil for potatoes. They're right there. They're amazing for potatoes. Self-watering containers are also a great option for container gardening. Depending on the product, they can range anywhere from $25 to $200 for the typical earth box. But in our next few slides, I'm going to show you some DIY methods that you can use for a self-watering container. A self-watering container has a perforated divider above the water reservoir, and it allows the water to be wicked up from the reservoir and the plant roots grow into the reservoir. It helps you conserve water and nutrients, and it can improve your overall growth. These are great containers for our salad greens in the spring, and then a tomato plant and some herbs, and are perfect for our balconies or decks. So as I mentioned, the bucket and bucket self-watering container is very, very easy to do. So it's 2 buckets that you drill. You'll need a drill, some bricks, a milk jug, so a fiberglass screen, and it's relatively inexpensive and an easy way to grow vegetables and herbs in a container. If you don't have access to a self-watering container, you can easily make this. The key thing for the bucket and bucket self-watering container is you want to do 1 plant per bucket. So 1 tomato plant or 1 pepper plant. You can do like 2 basil plants, but be pretty rigid on that 1 plant per bucket. So what kind of bucket should you use? Because this is always a really big question. You want to make sure that you are using a food grade bucket or FDA approved. So you'll look on the bottom of the bucket for the little triangle, and it should have a 2 or a 5. Most our food grade buckets are a number 2, and they're for, as you see here, pickles or milk jugs, food containers, or food grade pails. If it doesn't have that, the 2 or the 5, you should not use it. And these are also regularly available at some of our big box stores. You can find buckets pretty easily, or you could find them at our local grocery or bakery or coffee place. A lot of stores have buckets they're disposing of, and as long as they're food grade, you can use them. If they have had any type of chemical in them or detergent, you should not be using them for a food product. Another container that I absolutely adore is our salad table and salad box. They are a shallow raised container designed for growing our leafy greens at a comfortable height, and they are perfect for quick harvest and easy maintenances. They are very, very easy to construct, and do not cost a lot either to make. And I think Emily or Michaela are going to put the salad box instructions in the chat box. You can construct these to have a deeper depth for beans or pepper or tomato plants. Like any container, they're going to dry out really, really quick. So you need to be conscious of that when you're planting. So why they work so well. The shallow roots of greens make this an ideal container, and the elevated height reduces that bending and strain that you can get from like a low container or even in ground beds. They can have fewer pests and less soil contamination or compaction. They're easy to harvest, and they're so easy to replant for continuous production. So you could succession plant with one of these and have lettuce or greens, beet greens or radish greens every 2 to 3 weeks. If you're doing a plant that's like a cut and come again, you can sow it a little bit more densely. But these are great to use for our container gardens. I also like salad tables, especially because you can add wheels to the bottom and move those to the different places that you might need. So if you notice that hey, this area isn't getting as much sun as I actually thought it was. If you put wheels on the bottom, you can move it very, very easily. And because they don't have that deep rooting depth and that big amount of soil, they're very easy to transport. Also, if you have a higher raised bed and you find that bending and stretching to even harvest or hoe or just maintain, you can add a bench next to it to make it more accessible for yourself or your neighbors or your community garden. These are all the great ways that you can repurpose things and use them as a container. I especially like the milk crate because it's perfect for carrots. They can be difficult to grow in clay soils, and we have a lot of clay on the Eastern Shore, and it's usually pretty low in organic matter, and they have that perfect 12-inch deep container size. And it's just like the fabric bags, you can dump it out and just have all your carrots right there without any digging or dealing with clay. You can upcycle things like an old wheelbarrow as long as it has a drainage hole, right? Another kind of hard plastic crate, as long as they have drainage holes and they are food grade, you can use them. We have so many different things that you can use. I love this tomato plant in a laundry basket lined with floating row cover material to keep that soil in to contain the potting soil. That's a great method to reuse something. Or even the tower sack or the shoe bag planter. These are all really great methods to grow and repurpose things. Let's talk about what vegetables I don't like to grow because there aren't many. When we're looking at container plants, and especially our vegetable plants, when we look at the seed packet or even the little card that comes in with the transplant, if you're buying transplants, you want to look for words like container, bush, or dwarf, especially for larger crops like tomatoes and cucumbers, and our beans too, because those words mean that these are going to be best suited for containers. And sometimes they'll even tell you, like they do on this seed packet, what size pot you actually need for that plant. I always recommend that people grow things that they're actually going to eat. You can try something new. Hey, I'm all for trying new vegetables, but grow things that your family is actually going to eat and experiment with different varieties and spacing or location. And melons and gourds and corn are more challenging in a container just because our corn is very nutrient dense. It wants to take up and eat a lot of nutrients. And melons and gourds just vine so heavily that they need a little bit more space. So you might have to experiment with some vertical gardening and in with your container to grow them. Matching the pot size is very important when picking out your crops. So if you want to just grow greens, like Asian greens, garlic, even radishes and basil or lettuce greens, the depth of your pot needs to be about 4 to 6 inches. Now you can do a bigger pot, bigger depth of a pot if you have one, that's fine. But they need that 4 to 6 inch rooting depth. If you know that you eat a ton of beans or you want to grow tomatoes and squash or even fennel, you absolutely need a pot that has a depth of 8 inches or more for that root zone. Summer squash grows best in containers that are like 20 to 25 gallons. So this is where a 5-gallon bucket would not work for you. And we've found that cherry tomatoes love to be in a small pot. So think about the pot, think about the plant, and think about the place. So right plant, right place, right pot. So this is a really great graphic on the minimum size of the container that you need per plant or per type of plant. If you know that you want to grow beets, you're going to do a 1/2-gallon container. If you know that you love eggplant, you're going to do a 5-gallon container. Or if you want to do cherry tomatoes, you only need a 2-gallon container. This is a really great guide, and we can make sure that we send this presentation to everybody to have too, so they have that guide. If you don't have balcony space, if you don't have a sidewalk or a deck, you can also grow things inside with microgreens or even baby greens. You can use a plastic food container and make sure that it has a hole in it so that you have that drainage. And go shallow. Microgreens can be grown year round, indoors in strong natural light or with supplemental light like fluorescent or LED. High populations of multiple species are sown and harvested when the true leaf forms. And I always like to grow microgreens for variety and color and flavor. So peas or radishes and beets and cabbage and Swiss chard or carrots, they amazing microgreens. And UMD researchers have found that microgreens are higher in vitamins and phytochemicals than their mature counterpart. So you can grow baby greens with supplemental light year round and cut them when they're about 4 to 8 inches tall, and they'll regrow and be harvested for 1 to 2 more times. So that's a really great method if you don't have the space outside. So I love to grow herbs. It's one of my favorite things. And growing herbs in containers it's an amazing use for your herbs. I like to group them with similar needs, and kind of create like a microclimate for them. So if I know that my basil and my mint and my cilantro are going to need more water, I'm going to kind of put them in the same place. And then my rosemary, my thyme, and oregano, I'm going to put them in a separate place because they don't need as much water. And this is also a right plant, right place kind of thing because our rosemary, thyme, oregano, think about where they originated from and the climate they evolved from are native to, and it's a hot, dry climate. And our basil and mint and parsley are more of a tropical subtropical climate plant. And like I've said before, it's just move those containers around to find the right area, and the right amount of sunlight for that plant. Our cilantro is more of a cold season herb. So maybe it wants to be started early spring and you know it's going to bolt, so you move it to the shade. Or basil might want to be more in the sun than your cilantro. So move things around constantly. Pinch the flowers and the shoot tips to stimulate new growth. So I have found that my cilantro bolts really, really fast. So pinching those flowers back, or basil flowers, pinching those back so I have more leaf growth throughout the season. So you can also grow small fruits in containers. And Haley's more of the expert in small fruit production, but I would be amiss if I didn't mention this. So you can grow small fruits in containers, and they might not be as large or as productive as the same plant growing in the ground, but you can do them in a container. And one advantage of using a container is not only the portability, especially for citrus plants and subtropical and tropical plants, that you can move those indoors or into a greenhouse during the end of the growing season, but also if you have a soil issue, if you know you want to grow blueberries, but you have the wrong pH in the soil on your property, you can easily manipulate the soil in the container to grow blueberries in a container. If you wanted to do raspberries or blackberries, you want to make sure that you have a container that is a 10-gallon capacity for those. Blueberries, currants, gooseberries, even figs can grow in a container as well. But they need a little bit of a bigger container, so 15 gallons. And strawberries grow really easy in containers, and there are many different types of strawberry pots that you can use. And you can even find dwarf varieties as well. If you're going to experiment with growing container fruits, you want to make sure that you fill the pot with a 50-50 mix of compost and lightweight soilless potting mix. And in a few slides, we're going to get into the soil aspect and what kind of soil to use. But the word soilless potting mix is very key and something that you need to pay attention to when you are buying soil for your containers. So before you get started, you are going to mix up that potting mix and the compost and wet it down and moisten it before you fill the containers, because that soil is going to compact a little bit after you add it to your container. And you want to make sure that it's a nice fluffy area for those roots to grow. Keep the roots moist at all times. Use some drip irrigation systems with one or more emitters per container can be used to water plants. And you're going to fertilize regularly through the growing season. You're going to start in spring when the leaves start to expand and use a complete, balanced, all-purpose fertilizer that can contain macronutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, as well as micronutrients that have iron and manganese. You can move those containers to a protected location over winter. So mounding bags of leaves or mulch or straw bales around the side of those containers to reduce the risk of winter injury to the root systems. We're not going to move our cold hardy plants inside because this will interfere with dormancy. So blueberry, raspberry, blackberry, those are the ones that are going to stay outside. Tropical, subtropical plants are the ones that you're going to bring inside. Adding natives to containers are also a really great way to increase diversity in our landscapes and bring in our pollinators. And they create beautiful planter combinations. And you can match these with light requirements, full sun, part shade, full shade. And you can match those with species that will bloom at the same times as your crops. So this is a really great example of ferns with columbine and some phlox. And we have a great Maryland native plant program that is putting out publications all the time about native plants for our regions in Maryland. These are just some really inspiring container gardening photos from master gardeners all throughout the state. And I love the mix of colors and pots and containers and how, one person might focus just on vegetable gardening when the other person wants beautiful flowers along with their vegetable gardening. I love to see this. This is one that I took when I was in Ireland last year. I really love how this garden used old wood fragments, slices of wood, to elevate the gardening space. So you actually have little microclimates on each level. And then the plants were arranged by watering needs. I absolutely love this. It was like, this is what I'm going to emulate for my garden this year because it is just so thought out and well organized. So we've talked about lighting requirements. We've talked about our containers. We've talked about our crops. But what we really want to know about, right, is the soil and the growing media. And the success of your container garden starts with the right soil. And unlike in-ground gardens, containers require specifically designed growing media. So we're using potting mix. We're not using gardening soil. And garden soil is much too dense for containers, and it can lead to poor drainage along with root problems. A high quality potting mix is lightweight, well aerated, and we usually talk about soilless mix. So that's peat moss or coconut coir because they retain moisture. Perlite or vermiculite improves drainage and aeration, and compost can add nutrients as well as support plant health. And this is this is often the biggest expense that we have when gardening is that annual rejuvenation of the soil. And it's one that we talk about pretty frequently is the cost of soil and redoing the pots because we know how much it costs to redo the pots every year. So we can usually expect $10 to $20 to fill 3 5-gallon buckets or grow bag. So the reason why we don't use gardening soil versus soilless mix. So garden soil can contain weed seeds and possible pathogens. So when we talk about disease pathogens like fungi and bacteria, it is also very dense and can drown plants, especially in shallow containers. So when you buy growing media, you're paying for more pore space. Your high quality soilless mix or potting soils are lightweight and can contain 50 to 80% more pore space by volume. So if you have more pore space, this allows your roots to grow in spaces in between the soil particles, and air and water can also travel through those pore spaces. And water is the medium that carries the nutrients that plants need for their growth. And air is needed for root growth as well. We think about all of those things when we talk about the container, the soil container, or the soils for your container. Soilless potting mix are comprised mostly of organic materials that decompose and they can physically break down. So this is going to reduce the volume of your growing media over time, with particles becoming finer, reducing their water holding capacity and aeration. And that's why we talk about, hey, these need to be rejuvenated every year, because you're losing those things too. And you can also have some soil-borne diseases or plant diseases that are now mixed in with your soil. So this is one that I have found to be very, very true. You absolutely need to work water in with your growing media before you fill the pots, especially if peat moss is an ingredient, because it can get very saturated in one area and still dry in another. So mix it up really good with your compost before you fill the container and plant. We usually typically don't advise you to add rocks or gravel to the bottom of your pots unless you need it for added weight to prevent it from tipping, because that added rock can actually hold water and you don't want to create a root rot situation. You can cover the large drainage holes with mesh or a paper towel or coffee filter to prevent soil from washing out. We're also not going to compact that container with different media. We're going to make sure that it's still nice and loose and fluffy. And you want to make sure that after you have filled your container, you still have about an inch to inch and a half, even 2 inches from the pot rim. So we've talked about how we can reduce costs, or how expensive it is, right, every year to pay for soil to put in our containers. We're going to discard or compost last year's growing media if plant diseases were observed. Nutrients will be depleted in the saved growing media. So you're going to fertilize regularly following the year-to-year instructions if you're reusing media. If you're going to reuse it, you want to make sure that you are adding that 50-50 potting mix and soil compost in the spring. So dump it out, mix it with some new potting media and some new compost. But if you have noticed that your plants have a disease, you're going to need to get rid of that soil. If you don't, you're just going to reintroduce that disease back into this year's plants. One of the most important topics is plant care. So when we talk about after we talk about what we're going to grow and our soil, we need to think about, when do we plant these plants? Because it's different for every single crop, right? Our asparagus, we should be transplanting that outside in early April. And then we need to know if you are going to be doing something right if you're going to be transplanting it, have you hardened that off if you've grown it outside? And then keeping your containers together to increase the humidity is also really important, to making a little microenvironment and microclimate for them. And that also helps with water retention and watering ease. I really like to use the Home and Garden Information Center Growing Planting Guide, because it can tell me when I need to start my seedlings inside, when I need to plant things in the ground. So you can plant things directly in your container, or, hey, when can I expect this plant to be harvested? I love this guide. It's great. They have one for Central Maryland. They have one for the Eastern Shore as well. It's an awesome guide. And I think we can put that in the chat as well. Watering is a big issue with our containers because they can dry out so quickly. And we need to be checking these daily to make sure that they're not drying out, because they are going to show the effects of being dry much faster than our plants in the ground. I really like Oyas. I don't know if anyone has used them before for containers. They're unglazed clay pots, and you bury them in the soil, and they slowly release water directly to the plant roots. You bury them next to the plants, and the porous pots allow water to seep out slowly. And this can help reduce your water waste to about 50 to 70%. And they promote deep root growth versus that top of the container root growth. And you can find these pretty kind of inexpensively. They can range anywhere from 30 to $75 depending on the size, but there are also some really great DIY methods online. If you just Google Oyas DIY, you'll find a plethora of ways to make these yourself out of terracotta pots. The key thing with Oyas is that you need to prime them beforehand. So soaking them in water for about 15 to 30 minutes before you put them into the container ensures that your pot is ready to deliver water, not consume water, because terracotta pots will actually seek water out of the soil if they're dry. Watering tips. So overhead watering can actually promote disease. So we're going to water at the plant root or at the root zone, not at the leaves. Watering early in the morning as well. You want to check the soil moisture by just placing a finger on it and water when it's dry. Water until the water starts to run out of the bottom of the container. If necessary, I would just say you should always raise the container a few inches, even by placing them on a brick or little risers to help promote better drainage. And then that way they're not sitting on your sidewalk, they're not sitting on your deck or your balcony, and then you have some, drainage to actually help not rot things. Mulch and mini bark nuggets can also help conserve water. Even chopped leaves are a great way to help reduce evaporation and decrease watering needs. And you can also use saucers or self-watering containers to help conserve water and reduce nutrient loss and help prevent surface stains. Your plants are always going to need fertilizer if you're growing them in a soilless mix. You're going to fertilize as needed and replace nutrients that drain out. Potting soil and compost typically don't have enough nutrients to meet the plant needs, so you're going to have to use some type of fertilizer. It could be a liquid fertilizer, it could be a slow release fertilizer as well. The liquid fertilizers need to be applied more frequently, so that is, and the slow release fertilizers can last about 2 to 3 months depending upon the slow release fertilizer that is available. Vertical support such as trellises and A-frames, even strings, can improve yield, maximize your space, and boost healthy plants by increasing air circulation and help keep fruit off the ground. The ideal structure for if you're installing a vertical support is about 5 to 7 foot tall. And that's kind of impossible to do most of the time unless you have a lot of space. You can use strings, and they have really small trellises too that you can use in your containers. And that really, really helps not only with improving your yield, but helping reduce plant diseases. And then if you have a vertical space that you're growing your cucumbers up, maybe you can plant some herbs at the bottom of that space, or some carrots or lettuce. Even with the best care, container gardens are going to have our challenges. The good news is most of the time they're pretty easy to fix because it is a containerized environment. So if we have a lack of sunlight and we're seeing the effects of poor sunlight, you can match the plant needs by moving it to a location that is better adapted to that plant. Or maybe you picked out the wrong plant, so you need to plant something that can handle less sunlight if you don't have the right amount of sunlight. If you have overcrowding, thin those plants or prune them to increase the airflow. If you've noticed that maybe you're overwatering, skip a few hours. Ensure good drainage. Check the soil moisture daily. And that's true for underwatering as well. If you notice that your plants aren't growing as well as they should be, maybe they need a fertilizer, a slow release, or a liquid. Maybe you didn't add that into your potting mix. If you see some type of insect or disease or wildlife damage, inspect your plant regularly. Practice good sound IPM practices and protocols. So IPM is integrated pest management. The best defense is often an offense. So we're going to select healthy resistant plants or use physical controls like hand picking pests or properly identifying pests or just encouraging beneficial insects so that you have your beneficial insects to take care of your pest issue. You also have insect screenings like floating row covers are a great method in IPM to reduce our pests before the flowering season. So after plants flower and you know they need pollination, we're not going to use a floating row cover. And I thought this was really cool to help to deal with wildlife damage at the Maryland Fairgrounds is look at their tomato cage. Like it's a full-blown cage because they know that they have a problem with wildlife. So we have a ton of resources within the University of Maryland Extension. We have our Home and Garden Information Center, and we also have our Ask Extension service where you can submit a plant or pest question. And we have extension educators and certified horticulturalists from throughout the state that will answer questions within 48 hours. And it's always very helpful if you have a pest or a plant question, if you also submit a photo. And then we have our local extension programs. Many of our extension master gardener programs have Ask a Master Gardener plant clinics throughout the state. And especially during the growing season, we're at farmers markets, at libraries. All of our resources are usually on the extension news and events page where you can go and see what's in your county. We have a plethora of master gardener volunteers that you can search out on your local extension page per county. We have a lot of contributors for this presentation as well. And it is the year of the container. So we have a lot of resources on gardening with containers on our Grow It, Eat It Year of page. And this is where I take questions. Does anyone have any questions?